Hello, welcome to Wednesday Wisdom. My name is Sam King Davis, and I just want to share with you today a book called Mastery by a guy named George Leonard. This is a really great book, and it's a quick read. But the reason I wanted to share this with you is because I feel like the subjects talked about in this book are very pertinent to artists that I see, especially young artists, and also looking back at myself on the way that I've approached different things that I've wanted to learn throughout my life. Luckily, I've been able to grab a hold and make a long-term commitment to being a better artist, mastering, being an artistic master. Before we get started, make sure that you hit the subscription button below and click the notification bell so you'll get updates every Wednesday when these new ones come out. And this is the second chapter. It's pretty short, so I'm just going to read you the chapter and I'll talk a little bit about my experience with it. I want to point out that this author uses illustrations to describe the dabbler, the obsessive, and the hacker, and I'll put those on the screen so you can get a visualization of that. So, Chapter 2, Meet the Dabbler, the Obsessive, and the Hacker. We all aspire to mastery, but the path is always long and sometimes rocky, and it promotes no quick and easy payoffs. So we look for other paths, each of which attracts a certain type of person. Can you recognize yourself in any of the following three graphs? The Dabbler. The dabbler approaches each new sport, career, opportunity, or relationship with an enormous enthusiasm. He or she loves the rituals involved in getting the start, the spiffy equipment, the lingo, the shine of newness. When he makes his first spurt of progress in a new sport, for example, the dabbler is overjoyed. He demonstrates his form to family, friends, and people he meets on the street. He can't wait for the next lesson. The fall-off from his first peak comes as a shock. The plateau that follows is unacceptable, if not incomprehensible. His enthusiasm quickly wanes. He starts missing lessons. His mind fills with rationalizations. This isn't the right sport for him. It's too competitive, non-competitive, aggressive, non-aggressive, boring, dangerous, whatever. He tells everyone that it just didn't fulfill his unique needs. Starting another sport gives the dabbler a chance to replay the scenario of startup. Maybe he'll make it to the second plateau this time, maybe not. Then it's on to something else. The same thing applies to a career. The dabbler loves new jobs, new offices, new colleagues. He sees opportunities at every turn. He salivates over the projected earnings. He delights in the signs of progress, each of which he reports to his family and friends. Uh-oh, there's that plateau again. Maybe this job isn't right for him after all. It's time to start looking around. The dabbler has a long resume. In love relationships, perhaps an unexpected place to look for signs of mastery, but a good one, the dabbler specializes in honeymoons. He revels in seduction and surrender, the telling of life stories, the display of love's tricks and trappings. The ego on parade. When the initial ardor starts to cool, he starts looking around. To stay on the path of mastery would mean changing himself. How much easier it is to jump into another bed and start the process all over again. The dabbler might think of himself as an adventurer, a connoisseur of novelty, but he's probably closer to being what Carl Jung calls the puer aeternus, the eternal kid. Though partners change, he or she stays just the same. The obsessive. The obsessive is a bottom-line type of person, not one to settle for second best. He or she knows results are what count, and it doesn't matter how you get them, just so you get them fast. In fact, he wants to get the stroke just right during the very first lesson. He stays after class talking to the instructor. He asks what books and tapes he can buy to help him make progress faster. He leans toward the listener when he talks. His energy is up front when he walks. The obsessive starts out by making robust progress. His first spurt is just what he expected. but when he inevitably regresses and finds himself on a plateau, he simply won't accept it. He redoubles his effort. He pushes himself mercilessly. He refuses to accept his bosses' and colleagues' counsel of moderation. He works all night in the office. He's tempted to take shortcuts for the sake of quick results. American corporate managers, by and large, have joined the cult of the bottom line. Their profile is often that of the obsessive. They strive mightily to keep the profit curve angled upward, even if that means sacrificing research and development, long-term planning, patient product development, and plant investment. In relationships, the obsessive lives for the upward surge, the swelling background music, the trip to the stars. He's not like the dabbler. When the ardor cools, he doesn't look elsewhere. He tries to keep the starship going by every means at his command. Extravagant gifts, erotic escalation, melodramatic rendezvous. He doesn't understand the necessity for periods of development on the plateau. The relationship becomes a roller coaster ride with stormy separations and passionate reconciliations. The inevitable breakup involves a great deal of pain for both partners, with very little in the way of learning or self-development to show for it. Somehow, in whatever he is doing, the obsessive manages for a while to keep making brief spurts of upward progress, followed by sharp declines, a jagged ride toward a sure fall. When the fall occurs, the obsessive is likely to get hurt, and so are friends, colleagues, stockholders, and lovers. The hacker. The hacker has a different attitude. After sort of getting the hang of a thing, he or she is willing to stay on the plateau indefinitely. He doesn't mind skipping stages essential to the development of mastery if he can just go out and hack around with fellow hackers. He's the physician or teacher who doesn't bother going to professional meetings, the tennis player who develops a solid forehand and figures he can make do with a ragged backhand. At work, he does only enough to get by, leaves on time or early, takes every break, talks instead of doing his job, and wonders why he doesn't get promoted. The hacker looks at marriage or living together not as an opportunity for learning and development, but as a comfortable refuge from the uncertainties of the outside world. He or she is willing to settle for static monogamy, an arrangement in which both partners have clearly defined and unchanging roles, and in which marriage is primarily an economic and domestic institution. This traditional arrangement sometimes works well enough, but in today's world, two partners are rarely willing to live indefinitely on an unchanging plateau. When your tennis partner starts improving his or her game and you don't, the game eventually breaks up. The same thing applies in relationships. The categories are obviously not quite this neat. You can be a dabbler in love and a master in art. You can be on the path of mastery on your job and a hacker on the golf course, or vice versa. Even in the same field, you can be sometimes on the path of mastery, sometimes an obsessive, and so on. But the basic patterns tend to prevail, both reflecting and shaping your performance, your character, your destiny. At some of my lectures and workshop sessions, I describe the master, the dabbler, the obsessive, and the hacker. I then ask the people in the audience to indicate by a show of hands, leaving the master out, which of the other three would best describe themselves. In almost every case, the response breaks down into nearly even thirds, and the discussion that follows shows how easily most people can identify with the three types who are the subject of this chapter. These characters, then, have proven useful in helping us see why we're not on the path of mastery. But the real point is to get on the path and start moving. The first challenge we'll meet, as we'll see in the next chapter, is posed by our society. So what is the path of the master? If we're talking about the dabbler, the hacker, the obsessive, what is the path of the master? I'll put that up on the screen right now. This is an illustration of the path of the master, and you can see that it jumps up, sometimes comes back down a little bit, and it stays on the plateau most of the time. The problem with this picture that you see on the screen is actually that the plateau lasts a lot longer. Obviously, it was drawn like this to fit onto the page, but if you really look at the life of mastery, you'll see that you're on the plateau probably 90 or 95% of the time. And I really identified with a lot of the people that are described, particularly the Dabbler. I feel like my experience has been kind of a combination of dabbling and obsessing. There's been a lot of things that I've gotten into. I realize that there's a plateau. I obsess and I push it and I push it, and then I crash, and then I'll jump to something else. So for me, it's really been a combination of the two. I'd never really identified with the hacker because I always really wanted to be masterful. I always really wanted to be really good at something. When I saw artwork that inspired me, I wanted to be able to create that same inspiration for other people, and to have that sort of like superpower or that mastery to be able to pick up a paintbrush and just make something to communicate an emotion, to communicate a mood, or other things that I did. I always wanted to be really good at it. So I never identified with the hacker in a way that's been interesting in shaping my style, because I have a lot of, I'm a jack of all trades and the master of none. So I have a lot of skills in different areas, which I can kind of fuse together to make an interesting style. But about 6 years ago, I decided to take a course of mastery after reading the book Outliers. You've probably heard of the 10,000 hour rule, which just states that that mastery takes 10,000 hours of conscious practice. And that equals about 10 years if you're doing it full time. So I decided that I would dedicate 10 years to the art of caricature. And that meant caricaturing faces and bodies, but it also meant exaggeration, the art of exaggeration. So I did that. It's been 6 years now. And I can tell you that the commitment has kept me focused on exaggeration and the art of caricature. And the beautiful thing about that was the restriction that I put on myself helped me to realize that I can apply this principle to any kind of art. And another thing that opened up for me was that when I had a singleness of purpose, I was able to apply all of the, let's say, generic art principles or the basic art principles in that one direction. So that commitment and that major restriction to only caricature, only exaggeration, really opened up a world of practice, because it eliminated the question of, oh my God, how am I going to apply this principle? Oh, I got to try watercolor, or maybe I should try landscape, or maybe I should try abstract, or maybe I should go more realistic. It eliminated all of those questions, and the only rule was that it had to be exaggerated or caricaturized. So I was able to take watercolor and all of that, charcoal, watercolor, sculpture, animation, all of that, and I was able to apply all those skills into caricature. So it calmed that part of myself, and it answered that question of, oh my God, where am I going to apply this? I like how they talk in here about that it's easy to fall into one of these categories because of the way society is right now, especially the dabbler, and especially the obsessive, because there's so much access to information, so much access to online courses now, that it's very easy, especially for a guy like me, to get distracted and interested in something else when I don't see an immediate payoff. So it's hard. It's hard in today's world. And then, of course, there's this cult of productivity. There's a cult of self-help. There's a cult of endless improvement. And that's just not the reality. The reality is that we can't constantly be on an upward trajectory. There are downfalls. There are times where we meet challenges that we just can't face, or we don't have the means to face at that very moment, and we got to take a hit. But this obsessive guy that they talk about is easy to adopt because of the self-help culture, because of the hustle culture, because of the cult of productivity that's very prevalent in the media today. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you got something out of the talk. Make sure to leave comments below, and I will try to cover any topics that you might be interested in. These come out every Wednesday, so make sure to hit the subscription button, and see you next week. Have a good one.